Over the last 2 weeks, you've worked on reading two difficult texts, taking notes in those texts by asking questions that center on rhetorical choices, and ultimately drafting summary paragraphs of each one of these texts. What I want to draw your attention to is, well, two things here. So, two chief considerations as you revise forward. Some of them are easy to overlook and not consider. The other ones should be pretty apparent to you. And I'll show you where I draw them from because you can do the exact same thing. The first half of that is the minimum requirements. And when you look at the assignment directions, which is available to you all the time in the course homepage, it's pretty explicit that your summary needs to be one paragraph of 240 to 260 words. I have 200 words in my summary. Is that enough? Is 200 between 240 and 260? Well, no, therefore it's not enough. The idea here is that you use this worksheet as a checklist. Did I make sure that I use at least 6 sentences or more? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. Do I not exceed 260 words? Do I make sure that I have used double space, 1-inch margins, 12-point times New Roman? These things are pretty easy for you to check and be responsible for. So be sure that you are, because work that doesn't conform to that is going to receive a 0. Why would you put yourself through all this effort only to receive a 0? That seems kind of short-sighted. The second half of it is more content and organization related. When you go through each one of your summaries so far, you want to make sure that you're considering certain aspects. One is that when you look at the assignment directions, you know right off the bat what kinds of considerations I'll be taking into consideration, that is, while I look at your writing. And that is, how consistently well-proofed is your document. By the third or fourth draft, there shouldn't be any real mechanical errors in the document. The kind of evidence you use to support your topic sentence, the plain style, the demonstrable measure of summary, these are all rubrics available to you on the course homepage. I recommend opening those documents, looking at the rubrics, watching the course videos on the rubrics to see how these things really can work for you. Really, they're checklists in a lot of ways that you can use to look at your documents. The other half of this, though, is the organization and some choices you can make. For example, perspective and tense. If you're using pronouns like I and you and we, you're going to have a problem because that's not neutral or independent, is it? And think back to that cabin idea of comprehensiveness, accuracy, brevity, independence, and neutrality. Also, look at the summary mastery rubric. If you're not using third-person pronouns or perspective, your summary is not succeeding in being independent or neutral. Same thing for tense. These texts need to be described in the present tense, so Wimsatt and Beardsley, long since dead, are still arguing. Yes, they wrote the text many years ago, but if you open that chapter, you'll see that in their text, they argue, they discuss, they explain, they list, all present tense. So when you go through your paragraph, ask the question, what's the verb of my sentence? Is it in a tense that's appropriate here? And it's the same thing for evidence and details. You're trying to identify the overarching idea, the major points, the supporting points, examples, and quotes, perhaps in this kind of structure. So what's more important, identifying an overarching idea or offering a quote? Well, you have 250 words of space for real. That's not a lot of real estate. So if a quote is a complete sentence, that takes up maybe 10% of your paper now. Is that really a good choice? As a side note, quotes tend to be successful when they're brief. 1 word, 2 words, a phrase. When the language is too beautiful or unalterable, needs to be reproduced, then you quote. Otherwise, you don't want to really insert a quote because if you do, it's going to be too long and disrupt your language, and it's going to make your paragraph not be as cohesive as it could be. So as you're trying to figure out what kind of content to include, look at the rubric for evidence. You're trying to find evidence that supports the overarching idea or that topic sentence. And when you look at, and I'll give you 2 examples here, your summary paragraph. Look at that first sentence. I bolded it here. The intentional fallacy was written by Wimsatt and Beardsley in 1946 and published by Johns Hopkins University. That's a great fact. There's no denying that. It's important rhetorical information. But that's also the lead fact. So if I were to delete the rest of this paragraph and say, how well can I understand what the intentional fallacy argues? Well, the short of it is I can't. This doesn't really reveal anything about the text. It doesn't restate the central text's main idea. So how is it possible for your reader to be prepared? So this student amended her draft, and in a second draft, which is improved but still not ideal, in the intentional fallacy, W.K. Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley, or M.C. Beardsley if you'd like, analyze how to determine if a poem is successful and allow the reader to question what the true success of a poem means by breaking up their thought into 5 sections. Let's delete everything else and look at this document, and we see right away This is a much more succinct, encapsulative sentence. And if it's just the only sentence one person reads about a text, we know now what the intentional fallacy is about. So the strength of that topic sentence is key to the success of your draft, because everything in terms of evidence supports this one item. So if you don't have a good topic sentence and instead you have something that's just general and could be anywhere else in the paragraph, how are you going to support that? Do facts that you find later in the paragraph support when it was published and who wrote it? Those things don't seem to correlate. So this kind of information, while important, it's publication information or the year, etc., they don't tell us about the text in terms of a general idea. So try to go back to your first sentence. Try to find a way to explain to the reader what is going on in that paragraph. And in that way, you prepare the reader. Notice also how this writer was savvy enough to identify that the article is broken into 5 parts. She then also takes that geography, right, that idea of movement, and she uses it as anchor language or as transitional language. And watch as I italicize here. There's this idea of movement between the sentences. It's not really delicate, it's kind of heavy-handed, but it's functional. And it tells the reader how things are working, how they relate to one another. Look at the one above it. It reads more like a bulleted list. And we could look at it just like that, right? We can put this into a set of sentences that are just stacked together, happening to be made into a paragraph by this person because she just pressed space and started a new sentence, right? But really, these are just bullet points, and they read like it too. So I could take a sentence, I could move it, and it doesn't really have any significant effect on the way the paragraph works. And if it doesn't, then it's not really a paragraph in a cohesive sense. Instead, it's a bunch of facts. Whereas, look at this paragraph. If I were to take a sentence and move it around and put it somewhere else, it has a significant effect on the readability of the document because it needed to be where it was relative to the other pieces. It's like a puzzle. And so this writer has had the idea that if she explained things in terms of chronology, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, it helps her reader to understand why she's explaining things in the way she is. She telegraphed it, 5 sections. Great, now I'm prepared. She's going to walk through 5 sections, and it's an easy mnemonic device to prepare the reader. So when you're thinking about these ideas of arrangement of your paragraph, consider a strong topic sentence prepares the reader for what's to come. An explicit pattern tells the reader how you're going to organize your paragraph, and transitioning, whether temporal language, chronological language, causal language, nevertheless, therefore, however, whatever words you want to use to connect 2 sentences together to achieve a sense of cohesion, you need to consider that as a question. So go back to your drafts. Ask these questions of your peers. Could that first sentence be more topical? Could it be more encapsulative? Or is it something that's already really successful and you admire how well that person stated that idea? Does the paragraph use good sentence transitions to move from sentence to sentence to sentence? Is there a telegraphed or explicit idea of how information is going to move from point to point, whether by time, by chronology, by cause, however that's going to go into effect? And so when you look at each other's drafts, give feedback in terms of what you think is useful here. Give suggestions. Focus on those topic strings. Focus on those ideas of movement. And when it comes to evidence and details, ask the question, is the piece of information that is included as important as the other information, or something missing here from your reading of the text? Maybe that writer needs some suggestions about what information that was important that you thought might need address here. But as you revise, consider these ideas and reflect on them as you explain what it is you're changing across each draft.